Like, what's up with all the dead bees? It's because of the stuff that got sprayed?
At the beginning of this year, Kasey and I made a decision that scared us more than anything that we have ever done in beekeeping. We doubled down, we expanded our operation with one massive goal: to send 200 hives all the way to California for almond pollination this winter. That kind of leap forces you to look at fall beekeeping differently, because one mistake right now could cost us the entire season. And the truth is, whether you have 2 hives or 200, the same mistakes will take you down. So today, I figured it'd be a perfect time to break down the top 5 fall mistakes that a lot of beekeepers make, the exact ones that we're avoiding at absolutely all costs, so that your bees actually make it through the winter strong.
That's a box of bees.
Hey, guess what, guys? Can you guys believe it? I am out here feeding once again. We had to go get another tote of syrup. Our last tote of syrup, though. I promise it's our last tote of syrup. We went through 7 totes this year. That is a pretty penny. But I'm out here checking weight. But the very first mistake, which you probably heard a million times already, that a lot of beekeepers make, is they don't quite take Varroa mites seriously. And if they do, they don't take action until it's too late. So I've tried treating the hives in September. I've tried treating the hives in July, but there's a sweet spot of treating all of your colonies for mites when they start making those winter bees at the beginning of August or the end of July. Now, this will be a little bit different depending on where you're located. The southern states seem to have a lot more leeway because they don't have to treat as early as us up in Michigan, up in the northern climate. We have a very short window up here of when the bees have to be on and make honey, and when they have to start preparing for winter if they're going to actually be able to be strong and make it out okay. It is September 20th, and last time that I was in all of these colonies, they were all washing anywhere between a 0 to a 2 in a mite wash. You generally want to see those mite washes as low as possible because these bees are actually going to start decreasing their size. Now that it looks like the goldenrod is for the most part coming to an end, we have been very dry here. So a lot of them are starting to burn up and get kind of crusty looking. Yeah, see, these are already going to seed. So since goldenrod is coming to an end, they're going to start cutting back how much they're laying. They're going to start cutting back their cluster so that they can prepare for winter. So keeping that in mind, when they start cutting back, the mites will skyrocket, because say they have 1,000 mites in their colony, and say they have, just like for easy numbers, 2,000 bees. Well, then once they cut back because of the flow stopping and preparing for winter, it's going to go from 1 mite on every second bee to then having 1 mite on every single bee. And well, they spread viruses, they make them sick, they suck the life out of them. They pretty much suck out the one thing that is responsible for helping them overwinter. So naturally, it will end up collapsing the colony and hurting them very bad. So that is why mites are so important in our operation and keeping them under control. So I'm going to go around in the next couple weeks and probably do a vapor on everything just to help clean stuff up. They don't have to have absolutely 0 mites, but you want it to be as low as humanly possible. So that will be my plan. Seems that fall just hit literally overnight. All of the leaves are starting to change and start to fall to the ground. But it is that time of year. October is right around the corner. So that means snow is also right around the corner. Yes, I said that word. One of the trickiest parts about treating for mites in the fall is knowing when and what to treat with. the general recommendation is that you don't want to see more than 3% mites in a test. So if you were doing an alcohol wash with about 300 bees, that's what a half a cup of bees would be, that means that no more than 10 mites in a sample. But here's what I've learned over the last 6 years. If you're seeing even 5 mites this time of year, that's already way too many. Why? Because as the colony starts shrinking for winter, that same mite load doubles in impact. Plus, you've also got mites still reproducing under the brood cappings, so the actual number is going to be even higher than what you tested for. Luckily, we knocked our mite loads way down back in May, and since most of these hives started out from 3-frame splits, they've actually stayed pretty low, except for the pine yard, which that's where we did that little experiment in, if you want to call it that. So for these hives, I just did a lighter treatment of a single pad of formic followed by some oxalic acid vapor, and that's really all that they needed. But if I had opened these hives in August and found a 2% load, I would not have hesitated to hit them with a full 2-pad formic treatment and follow that up by something else to knock them back hard. The crazy thing about mites is you usually don't notice the damage until December, when the cluster is only the size of a softball. And by then, though, it is already way too late. So I've always said that if your hive dies before the new year, there's a very good chance mites were actually the reason for it.
Alright, so I only had to feed 2 of the hives. This week has actually been really good for goldenrod. Like I said, it's been really dry, so we haven't been able to get too much rain. But it was 80 degrees all week, which is perfect weather for the bees to start getting some goldenrod and for the goldenrod to start producing some nectar. And there is a knotweed plant in this yard in particular, so I think they're really able to kind of capitalize on that. This landowner is awesome too, because look at all these flowers that they planted for the bees. Like, I know the girls are loving that. Looks beautiful. And they also left us a wildflower patch right here. You know it's dry when literally the corn dried in probably like 2 days. It's almost completely brown now. There's still a little bit of green in it, but not very much. Yeah. We need some rain, that's for sure. All right, now mistake number 2, and that is underestimating just how much food your bees actually need. They need at least 80 pounds of honey in order to make it through the winter successfully, at least for up here in Michigan, because they pretty much have to go through all of October, November, December, January, February, and then towards the end of March, they start getting a very, very slow trickle of maple nectar, but they pretty much have to go 6 months without any food whatsoever. So in order for them to actually be big coming out of winter time, they have to have that entire top box full of honey. Now, you can get away with doing a 5/5 or a single deep to get through winter. But what you're doing is you're comparing, okay, how many bees do you have in the hive versus how much honey do you need to have for those bees. These hives behind me are literally boiling over with bees. When I crack the lid, they're just like dropping down off the lid. There's so many bees in these hives. And because they have so many bees, they're gonna blow through all of those stores really fast. So that's why these need an entire top box full of feed. But if you were doing, say, like a 5/5 kind of setup with a nuke, then you could really get away with a cluster only that big. All it is just having enough bees to fill the space that you have in order for them to stay warm and maintain their heat and keep their brood going. So I noticed that this yard still has some goldenrod that is in full bloom. That's why it's such a nice bright yellow color. But the rest of everything, got some over here too, which is pretty good. But the rest of it is pretty much going into winter mode. Got a hive over here that must be boiling over. Look how many bees are on the outside. Ooh, they're washboarded a little bit. Whew. I still got a little bit of pollen coming in. I see a couple. Oh my goodness, you see what I mean? That is a fantastic hive. But something you also want to keep in mind is you don't want to completely choke them out. So if you do that, they're not going to be able to produce as much brood as they need for the winter. Oh yeah. Those are heavy. That's good. So I am going to be going around again in a week once everything is officially done with the flow and checking where they're at then. But generally, I don't like to feed after September. I've learned my lesson the hard way with that, so trying to feed all the way through to November. And the bees need to be able to dehydrate that, otherwise it gets very, very moist in their hive. It creates a moist environment, as if it's not capped, if the feed is not capped in the cells, then it's still emitting moisture into the hive. So that's something to keep in mind too.
One of the biggest things that I've learned about feeding bees in the fall is knowing when there's actually a nectar flow and when there isn't. In my area, the last 2 to 3 weeks of August are basically a complete dearth. There's no pollen, no nectar coming in, and that's usually when a lot of beekeepers start to panic because their hives don't look as strong as they'd like. And that is actually a very crucial time when giving your bees a little bit of extra feed can actually make a big difference. Then going into September, goldenrod, fall asters, and knotweed usually start blooming, at least in my area. And that is the last real nectar flow that the bees depend on in order to build up for winter. But here's the thing. There's like an asterisk on that because I've learned not to depend on it. Some years the goldenrod flow is strong, and other years it really just fizzles out. I have not once seen a goldenrod year where it just hit really hard, at least not in the last 6 years of me being a beekeeper. So instead, I feed right through it. That way the bees can bulk up while they're also bringing in some of that natural pollen. Also, so that they don't burn off all of their food going out and flying and getting all this pollen, because that is exactly what they do. But also, I know that by the end of September and into early October, the nighttime temps really start dipping below 50. And once that happens, the syrup cools down and it doesn't really have enough time during the day for it to start heating up again so that the bees can take it down. So by feeding earlier, I don't have to worry about the bees missing their chance to put away enough resources, and I pretty much guarantee that they're going to have enough to make it through the winter.
Alright, so this yard was a little bit hungrier than the last yard, but you also got to think, so this yard has queens that we shipped in from a breeder out in California, Z's Bees. His carnelians are fantastic. Highly recommend. So they are boiling over with bees. They have more bees than the last yard, I would say. Just slightly though, maybe just like one brood cycle. And they're lacking a little bit of food because I'm noticing I'm not really seeing any knotweed around here, and I've learned knotweed is a really good provider of nectar. So any yards that have knotweed, they do fabulous this time of year. But this yard has a lot of goldenrod. Goldenrod doesn't produce a ton of nectar, it produces a lot of pollen, so that would explain why they're so big and why they don't have as many stores. So that's about normal. The other yard we were just in was the yard that we did all those walkaway splits. So those are all genetics that are just local, since they just bred with anything that was in the area back in April. So yeah, overall, I'm still really happy with both though. They're looking amazing. And it feels so good to watch a plan fall into place. All right, this next one may be a little bit controversial, but mistake number 3 is to insulate or not to insulate. So Kasey and I have personally never insulated our hives. We haven't really found a need to do that because if you maintain a strong brood nest and they have enough food, then really they don't really need to be insulated, even though we're located in Michigan. Now, that may be different the farther north that you go, say up in Canada, that might be a little different too because their temperatures are a lot more drastic. They have a lot more blizzards, and I'm sure they have a longer winter as well too up there. But for some people, insulating has been very beneficial, but there's also a lot of drawbacks you have to keep in mind too. And that is that you have to keep in mind the amount of moisture in the hive. So the bees, they need to have that contrast of hot and cold, of cold on the outside and hot on the inside to, yes, you don't want to have any condensation underneath the lid, but it actually is really beneficial to have a little bit of condensation on the walls inside the hive so they can still get some water. Bees do need water and they can't go out and collect it in the wintertime. So if you insulate it, it prevents them from being able to get that water. But then a pro is that since they're insulated, they're then going to be able to, they won't have to work as hard to stay warm throughout the winter time. So you can go through with a smaller cluster and in theory, they should do a lot better. Ooh, so yeah, they're still bringing in quite a bit of pollen, which is good to see. Means I don't need to put any pollen on them right now. So we're gonna wait for that and just keep checking for weight.
So one more thing that I forgot to mention about having an insulated hive, and this is actually why Kasey fell in love with Apimaze and why I have fallen in love with Apimaze too. And when you do have a hive that is insulated better than what our typical hive box is, they are able to actually lay more eggs and expand their brood nest more than if they didn't have that insulation, because they're able to keep that heat in, and since they can keep their temperature just a little bit warmer in that hive, the queen actually feels safe to be able to kind of expand a little bit more than just the very like 2/3 of her cluster. So that is the biggest thing that we've learned with watching hives that go through in an apame, that they are able to come out in the spring with a bit of a bigger brood nest.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, those are good. A lot of these feel pretty good. This one is the one that I accidentally left open. I had the lid over in feeding position, and well, they went in, killed the queen, took all the resources, and for some reason the bees still stayed. And they made a new queen. She came back successfully. This was also at the beginning of August, by the way. And since then, I've added bees to them, and I've fed them twice. So, let's see how they're doing now. Nice. It's reasonable. Biggest thing is just how heavy it is. I'm sure they're going to need more feed. Oh yeah, they need feed. They're gonna get double. Oh, I know I work out and stuff. This is the time of year that my back really starts getting whipped into shape because these boxes are not light. All right, just gonna feed these girls and move on to the next yard. Easy peasy. Whew, it looks like we actually have a little bit of goldenrod that is still in bloom. I think this yard is a little bit behind the rest of them. Would make sense why it took them so long to build up. But also kind of odd because I have a yard literally 2 miles away from here, 3 miles away from here or so, and they're ahead of this yard, so I don't know. But mistake number 4 is not doing that final check of the brood nest. So I know I'm going through these hives pretty fast. I am just kind of like popping the boxes and I'm looking to see how many bees I'm seeing in each box. So for me, that's me kind of doing that final brood check, because you're going to notice, since I've been checking these every week, I know where they should be now based off of where they were last week. So if I see that they're not kind of like growing, not buzzing the way they need to be, don't have the right amount of bees in them, I know there's something wrong. So there was a hive that I checked at the banker's yard that exact thing happened. I popped it. I remembered it being bubbling over with bees, but then I looked in it and I saw there wasn't as many bees as there was before. So I dug in deeper to see that they didn't have a lot of room really for the queen to lay. They had lots of stores, lots of pollen, and only a little bit of room for her to start laying her eggs. And that's part of the problem of when you feed them. You have to find the balance. You don't want to feed them too much where they don't have enough room to lay, but then you also don't want to feed them not enough so that they end up starving and she ends up slowing down and not laying as much, because depending upon how many stores are coming in and how many stores are in the hive determines how many eggs that queen's going to lay, because she knows that she only has so much food to feed them, so she's not going to try to push past what she knows that her bees can take care of. Otherwise, they end up collapsing from starving to death. So it is good just to double check to see how they're doing in terms of their brood nest, because now is a time that you can troubleshoot any problems that you're seeing. If you're noticing there's a queen that's failing, you can combine her with another hive, pinch her of course, but combine that hive with another hive, so then at least the hive has enough time to readjust to how many bees you just put in that hive and store accordingly and get everything situated accordingly before the snow starts flying. This is my really hot yard, so I'm not even going to risk trying to keep my t-shirt on over my sports bra. So yeah. So last time I was in this yard, it was not looking the best. Let me go to these last. I'll go over here first because these are the ones that were kind of behind. So let's see how they're looking now, if they actually caught up. Okay, much better. They've just needed a lot of TLC. Like, meaning, that's interesting how they're all in a line like that. Like, meaning a lot of feed, a lot of pollen. These are expensive bees, to say the least, but at least they're coming around and they can actually, hopefully, make grade. I did see some bees with some pollen on their legs coming in, so maybe this yard is just a little bit behind. Which that's fine if that's the case. I could deal with that. All right. Only 2 so far. Now, let's see about this side. Yeah, all of this goldenrod looks like it's in peak bloom right now. Why is this yard behind? But a yard literally 3 miles away is not behind. Maybe it's all late goldenrod right here? I don't know. Oh. All right, only 3 of them need feed. I don't have any complaints with that. Yeah, just so odd, so bizarre how far behind this yard is. But hey, like I said, at least they're actually getting caught up. Gosh, I freaking love our landowners. They are so kind. So we're at the glass yard, end up running into one of the landowners, was chatting with him for a minute. But that gets me to tip number 5. Well, really, mistake number 5 that a lot of people make. And I've kind of already hinted at this just a little bit throughout this entire video, throughout this entire day. And that is to keep an eye on how big your brood nest actually is. If your brood nest is starting to get pretty small, remember, it's probably going to decrease by at least 25% in its size. So that being said, if you have a cluster of bees that's only this big, it's going to get down to like this. And are they going to be able to make it for 6 months without any food coming in? That is the real question. So at that point, it is best to always just combine the hive to another hive. So at least one hive is set up for success versus trying to make 2 hives make it and then both of them end up collapsing.
So Kasey and I have actually been keeping an eye on this since way back in July. We knew how big each hive had to be in order to hit the size that we needed and to draw out all of the comb we were aiming for this year. And every single one of these hives ended up drawing out 13 frames on their own. Now, I will be honest, and I've said this a couple times, the way that we did it this year was a little stressful. Well, a lot stressful, and we'll probably never do it exactly like this ever again. But the reason that it worked is because we were looking ahead and paying attention to what the hives were capable of back in midsummer. So we gave some of our stronger colonies a third box that they were actually able to draw out and fill it with honey and brood for us so that we could use those as extra resources to help boost the hives that were falling a little bit behind. And that is something that you can do too. If you've got a hive that needs a little bit of extra help, you can always pull a frame of capped brood and honey from a strong hive and give it to a weaker one. But the key is timing. In August, it works absolutely great. But once you get later into the fall, you have to be more careful because at that point, you're pulling from that strong hive's winter bees. And you don't want to weaken your best colonies right before winter. So this yard actually needed more feed than any of the other yards needed today. But this was one of them in particular that was a little bit behind. They were a little late on coming back from their mating flights, and so they really only had all of June and July to build out their hive and draw out frames. So this yard in particular was one of those that did get some of those extra resource frames to help boost them. And honestly, this yard was starting to make me quite a bit nervous, but they actually caught up and they're on track to go into winter super strong. And this is what I love the most about beekeeping. It's not about perfection. It's 100% about persistence. Even the hives that fall behind have the potential to thrive if we don't give up on them. The same goes for us beekeepers. Every season, every challenge, every mistake is just another chance to learn and to grow. And when you look back in spring and see your bees pouring out of those boxes, you'll know it was worth every bit of the effort that you put in right now. So keep going, keep learning, and keep building stronger bees because you never know just how far the work that you do today will take you tomorrow. So I hope this video was helpful and I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't quit and be fit.